Right, so we'll be joined momentarily by Dr. Mohan Kumar. We'll link up with him in just a bit. But just to recap the top story we are tracking here on DD India. Prime Minister Modi, as we speak, is in Canada for the G7 summit. He will have discussions with other world leaders at that summit and also hold bilateral meetings with a number of other world leaders, including, for instance, the leaders of Germany, Italy, Ukraine, and of course, the host country, Canada. Right, joining us is Dr. Mohan Kumar. He's a former Indian ambassador to France and Bahrain. Ambassador Kumar, welcome to DD India News Hub. First up, what are your expectations from this year's G7 summit?
Thank you very much, Ramesh, for having me.
Welcome.
I think this G7 summit takes place in very, very difficult circumstances from a purely geopolitical point of view. I mean, you've got the Ukraine conflict raging, Gaza has not returned to peace, and now you have the latest Israeli action in Iran. So it's hard to say that the international environment is not extremely difficult for Canada at this time to host a G7 summit. But the one way of looking at it is, never allow a crisis to go waste, and perhaps the utility of such fora are tested when the geopolitical circumstances are adverse and you can come up with something positive. So what I expect is that I think that the Canadians have done a good thing by saying we are not going to have a unified leaders declaration, but we will have a subject by subject statement. And they've already released one statement on the Israel-Iranian issue by saying that Israel has the right to defense, self-defense, and that Iran is the epicenter of terror, and that Iran must not get the nuclear bomb. And President Trump, it appears, signed on to this statement, which is a big improvement compared to the last time he was here in Canada. So they've got that out of the way, and they are discussing the other issues. And then, of course, they will have the outreach event very soon when Prime Minister Modi will be able to put his views across. So far, I wouldn't say that they have done too badly, frankly, under the circumstances. So at least Canada has risen to the occasion, and they have been able to come up with one unified statement on the Israel-Iran issue.
Indeed, as you say, Ambassador Kumar, Trump has left the summit early. There's no joint communique, but as you mentioned, they've already issued a statement on the Iran situation, which talks about de-escalation and also reiterates that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Now, talking about Trump, Ambassador Kumar, Trump has reiterated that Russia should return to the G7 to make it G8. Interestingly, he's also said that maybe it'll be a good idea to rope in China as well.
So, as you know, President Trump has this habit of making off-the-cuff remarks, and he believes that Russia and China are great powers and that they should be included in this gathering so that he can have an opportunity to sit with them. He genuinely thinks that Russia's presence might help if Ukraine and Russia were to be there, and if he is there, he can really bang heads together and try to get a solution. But I wouldn't describe these as anything more than off-the-cuff remarks so far. You need a consensus in G7 for any meaningful expansion, and certainly the Europeans will not take kindly to the suggestion that Russia should be included. As you know, they are angry with Russia for having invaded Ukraine, and they are actually contemplating further sanctions on Russia. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but those are the views of President Trump, and you will have to take them at face value.
And what about China, Ambassador Kumar? Would you, for instance, welcome China as a member of this elite club, so to speak?
My personal view is that it goes against the grain of G7, which was about liberal democracies. I mean, there were two characteristics about the G7 when it was established 50 years ago. One, that it was actually the leading economies of the West, and secondly, they were all political democracies. Now, it's understood that this grouping has lost some of its luster and shine because the GDP share of G7 is no more what it was in its heyday. For example, in 1980, it was close to 70% of global GDP. Today, it is less than 30% or less, about 30%. And that is because the center of economic gravity has shifted to China, but also to countries like India. So, in that sense, President Trump has a point. But then, if you open the Pandora's box, then the question will be asked, what about India? And what about South Korea? What about countries like Brazil? So, it is never ending in those terms. So, I would say that it's a difficult thing for G7 now to expand. Right now, they are concentrating on cohesion and trying to see if they can get common position. It is difficult to get a common position in G7. How are you going to get it if you expand it further to include China? So in that sense, I don't see expansion or the possibility of G7 expansion being imminent.
As we talk, Ambassador Kumar, we have those visuals playing out on our screens of the leaders gathering for a family photograph, the G7 countries plus the President of the European Council and Commission. Now, talking about the Canadian edition of the summit, the 51st G7 summit, Ambassador Kumar, Canada as a host country has invited 10 other countries, including India, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, the UAE, and so on. But interestingly, of those 10 countries, 7 are attending this year's summit, 3 are not. They are Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and the UAE. They chose to skip the summit. Should we see it as a design?
No, it's interesting that those three countries have chosen to stay out. Each country has a particular reason why it has chosen to stay off or stay away. I would say both Saudi Arabia and UAE will have stayed away because they know that G7 is going to condemn Iran and would side with Israel.
Right.
And for both Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, this would be a problem. In the case of Indonesia, it's interesting. They have chosen to stay away because I think there is a visit to Russia that the Indonesian president was committed, and he somehow puts the visit to Russia as being more important than the visit to Canada for attending the outreach session with the G7. And that by itself is a story in terms of how Indonesia extends or Indonesia appreciates its priorities. So I think each of the countries which has chosen to stay away from the G7 summit in Alberta, Canada, have their own reasons for staying. Ramesh, the problem is the world is an extremely difficult and divided place. It's really each country to its own. We do not have a hegemon in that sense. The unipolar moment is long gone. The liberal international order has collapsed, and you have different power centers in the world. So what you are seeing in many ways is a reflection of the fragmented multipolarity that you see in today's world. So in many ways, the G7 is a reflection of the actual state of the world today.
Indeed, well said and point taken, Ambassador Kumar. And finally, let's talk a bit now, if you will, about India-Canada ties. Canada is hosting the Prime Minister for the G7 Outreach Summit, and also they'll be holding a bilateral towards the end of the day's proceedings as well. Do you think this visit of the Prime Minister might or could lead to a reset or the beginning of a reset in bilateral ties?
Absolutely. In fact, that may be the biggest positive if it happens for India. I genuinely think that the kind of tiff that Canada and India have had for the last 2 years did neither country any good. Both countries lost out, and I genuinely think it was magnanimous of the Indian Prime Minister to actually extend an olive branch when Mark Carney was elected, and he made it a point to congratulate him. And since then, Mark Carney has repaid the favor by saying very clearly that, listen, we have to have important countries like India attend the G7 meeting. The foreign ministers of Canada and India have spoken. So, what I expect, and I'm sticking my neck out, barring unforeseen circumstances, I expect two things to happen. One, there should be an immediate restoration of high commissioners in both Delhi and Ottawa. And secondly, we should also try and see whether ministerial meetings can be resumed. So the diplomatic missions and their strength must be restored to the level of the High Commissioner, and ministerial meetings, if they can be followed up with ministerial meetings, it's time for Canada and India to put this entire episode behind and look at the future. In the world that we are in at present, I would suggest to you and the viewers that Canada and India need each other, and the relationship is an important one, and it is in the mutual interest of both countries to actually have a clear pathway to full normalization and to try and take the relationship to the next level.
Very significant remarks there, Ambassador Kumar. As I say, watch this space. Thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts and perspectives with our viewers at home and abroad. Thank you for your time. Much appreciated.